Performance is, you know what? I think that might not be quite enough. We'd like to practice a little. So now I call that's a performance level unit or hospital or system. But until you decide to do it ongoing and then agree to evaluate what that looks like. So what are we measuring? We're going to do this ongoing, and then we're going to reevaluate. Well, now you're high performance, and that's what I'm doing.
Clock in, scrub up, and join us behind the red line. You're listening to First Case, a perioperative podcast bringing you exciting interviews, engaging discussions, and innovative solutions that are changing the way patients receive surgical care. Each episode, we talk to frontline staff, perioperative leadership, and nursing entrepreneurs from across the country as they share their stories, experience, and expertise on the industry we love. From the back table to the boardroom, from wheels in to wheels out, we tackle the real-life issues affecting the OR. Whether you're tuning in for surgical service education or inspiration, we're glad you're here. And now it's time to roll back and start the first case.
On today's episode of First Case, we are speaking with Susan Davis. Susan is the Resuscitation Manager at a healthcare system in Florida, and overall just cardiac arrest, code prep, code expert. And Chris, when I was thinking about our topics for this season, at first I was only thinking about the, quote unquote, big disasters, those events that happen maybe seasonally or even once in a lifetime. And then it occurred to me that a code in the OR or anywhere within our health systems is just as much of an unplanned event as a tornado, except it's more likely to happen because of the work that we do. And so we have to be prepared because it is a very real possibility that a patient will crash and we're going to have to code them in order to save them.
Absolutely. And there isn't any other time than then for us to act perfectly and professionally and efficiently. And Susan's got some great tips for how to do that.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with Susan Davis.
Hi, I'm Chris Blevins.
And I'm Melanie Perry.
From the studios of Healthcare HQ, you're listening to First Case.
Welcome to this week's episode of First Case. Today we are speaking with Susan Davis, Resuscitation Manager at a healthcare system in Florida, a member of the Citizens Advisory Committee for the CPR Foundation, and founder and CEO of Code Prep. Susan, thank you so much for joining us today.
Melanie, what a treat. I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you.
Susan, I am so excited that you are here with us today. And Chris, I didn't tell you beforehand, but Susan and I connected through LinkedIn. And a while back, she and I were together on a webinar series all about codes in healthcare. And I was the person who was talking about what it's like when a code is called in the OR. And I probably spilled the beans a little too much about the realities of what it's like when a code is called, because how many times is it just said that anesthesia runs the codes and we're going to let them deal with it. And then the rest of us are like, I'm going to stand over here and watch and I'll go get something.
Yeah, no kidding.
Right? So we know that is the reality for most ORs. And before people say I'm throwing shade at everybody, I realize some people are more prepared than others. But that is something that we deal with on a regular basis. And so because of that, I think it's great that we can work on fixing that with a conversation today, like the one we're going to have with Susan. But before we jump into all of that, Susan, why don't you just go ahead and introduce yourself to everyone and tell them a little bit about who you are?
Absolutely. So I am a critical care nurse by trade. My background is in trauma and emergency. I also have my medic license. I've done a little flight. And no matter what I try to do to get away from cardiac anything, I seem to come all the way back around again to the very next code. Because, they are not rather convenient and they don't ask permission and they keep coming anyway. I'm not sure what's up with that. But so here you have it. I find myself a cardiac arrest response specialist, primarily in the in-hospital setting. That's been my focus, my work for the last decade or so. But in the last year, I have kind of pivoted into the public sector and in the public health space because I realized, ding, 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 all these people coming into our hospital actually come from the community. So what can we do
Right.
a little further upstream? Turns out 70 to 80% of cardiac arrests happen at home.
Right.
And then I was like, oh gosh, what are they going to do until help arrives? So the whole this thing evolved over the last decade of me realizing that my niche, if there could be a smaller niche, I'm not sure, but I am the master of the first 2 to 6 minutes of cardiac arrest, which primarily focuses on the basic life support response. And I don't care where you are. You're at home, you're at soccer with your kids, you're at the airport, or you are in the OR or any other unit in a hospital. Those first 2 to 6 minutes should look the same. And I think your listeners and probably each of you will report that that's not the case, right? It looks like a whole lot different than we think it probably should. So my whole gig is, my soapbox is, what are we going to do to fix the first 2 to 6 minutes of cardiac arrest? What can we do to improve the courage and the action and the skills verification of what those first few minutes looks like, regardless of where you are, right? Recognize problem, call for help, and act, and do so confidently. So that's my deal.
And that's the big one right there, to be able to do it confidently, because I think that's where we get hung up. We get trained, we have our training. We can discuss whether or not it's adequate or whether or not it's frequent enough in a little bit, but that the training we have, because we're not just the quote unquote regular community. We supposedly are the experts and we are professionals, and yet we still don't have the confidence that we need when something happens. So that's where I think that we can really work on building ourselves up to actually be the experts that spring into action when something happens. But I want to talk about that first 2 to 6 minutes in just a second. But before we do, all of your niche and passion actually turned into a company. So can you tell us a little bit about this company that you started and why you started?
Yeah, so what a major pain in my bucket. So here I am, just really excited about training people, and it really, Code Prep started out of the necessity of that response. So back in the day when I was working in the ER and would respond to the inpatient environment, you know, when we got there, I just couldn't imagine, like, what was the missing link? Where's this gap from all of this amazing education, quote unquote, that we're getting, and then what we're seeing clinically? So Code Prep was created. I studied in my master's and then again in my doctorate in hospital cardiac arrest response. What does it look like? Where are they spending their money? Where are they spending their time? And then ultimately, is it translating to practice? So no matter what I found, no matter what I looked, and I don't care how wealthy they are or not, systems and of care, we're still not getting the outcomes. So I said, I threw everything out the door. I said, we don't need a mock code program. And I think what we need is we need to go back further. We needed some meat and potatoes, the brief, hands-on, repetitive practice. And then again, so you guys, I did not mention, but I was the director of the American Heart Association program for a large healthcare system. I'm talking 200 plus employees a week for 10 years, basic, advanced, and pediatric life support. So guess what? They're scared to death. The learning environment, no matter how good I made it, I don't care whether it's instructor-led and then blended. And now today we have this, take the class in your jammies at home and then go to a little closet in the hospital somewhere and do a few compressions, boom, 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 and a few.
That is terrible, by the way. It is absolutely terrible.
That's supposed to equal what we need to do when the duty hits the fan. So, okay, bottom line is everybody knows that that's not cutting the mustard. So I've been doing this for 10 years. And I just go in with teams. I teach them what do you do in those first few minutes? Literally, hands on. I mean, it's grab the crash cart, it's turn it on, it's use the defibrillator, replace the pads. How about the backboard? There is a thing called the backboard. There's evidence that says that if we use it, it really
Can
works.
we just talk about those first few minutes? Because, you've mentioned several things about how critical those are and about confidence and, going back to the basics. But I think the first thing that you have to do is breathe, like yourself, right? And you have to get over the fear, which, by the way, all of these, virtual simulations and getting to, be in the comfort of your own home and all of these mock trials, like that doesn't simulate the holy crap, this is actually happening moment that you have to get over really quickly in order to be able to act effectively in that first 2 to 6 minutes. Like, how in the world are you able to knock that out of someone in order to make that 2 to 6 minutes actually start to, become something effective for that patient?
So it's actually way super duper easy. I mean, it's like silly how easy it is. That's why this business is
booming.
Because it's like, you guys, all I'm doing is reinforcing what we all know, but we just don't get to do. So low frequency, high risk event. The answer is, you guys, if you don't use it, you lose it. So all we're doing is doing this. It's 2 to 6 minutes. That's all I require, right? And they do the whole 9 yards, which, by the way, when we do this again and again and again, they're shocking / and or ready to shock in less than a minute and a half max, again and again and again. Do you know that across the United States of America, the average time for rapid response to arrive to an in-hospital cardiac arrest, of course, I know in the OR, it's quite different, but in the inpatient environment, it's 4.5 minutes, okay? Does anyone remember how long it was supposed to be before we do our first shock?
2 minutes
or less, right?
Yeah.
And the national average for first shock is 9 minutes.
No.
What?
Wow.
Okay, so it's not hard. Chris, all we do is practice. Brief, and I call it, an obit zone, right? Because in 2 to 6 minutes, respiratory 1, 2, and 3 get their hands on, they switch positions, boom, 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 we're done. And so the answer to your question is, when you do it all the time, and you handle it literally, and you take out all those extra words, let's get rid of the algorithms, let's get rid of these 6-hour classes in your jammies at home. What does that do other than make you really cranky, right? And your clicker finger gets crazy because you're desperately trying to click through it. Click, 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 click. I know they're going to give me the answer eventually. Click, 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 click. Give me a break. So anyway, I think what's happening, there's a new wave, and perhaps I'm pushing this tsunami, and I hope so. But what we need, and where I feel where I'm headed with co-prep is, clinical verification. So once you have that foundational knowledge, thanks, see ya. Now let's get our hands on this stuff. Your equipment with your team and your unit, brief hands on. It's low resource. I'm not talking about bringing in $1 gajillion and have to go to the top and veto. This is just silly. It's just silly. We just do it. And the roles are not assigned. Most hospitals already have roles. This is pre-roles. This is the human role involved, no matter where you are, for those first 2 to 6 minutes. And it doesn't matter what your equipment is. People always say, especially you guys in the OR or other specialty areas, but we have all this specialty equipment. Swell. But as long as as long as compressions are, happening, pads are on, backboards under, perhaps on the table, and you don't need a backboard in your scenario, and we're ready to push the button, then it's a minute and a half. Go ahead, rock stars. See ya. Here's the keys.
So it's more efficiency than anything. Yeah.
Well, it's mastering the basics, Chris. Yeah. None of the research in the world supports the drugs. Okay, the drugs are just throwing the birds on the bottom of the cage. Right? We're doing our best. It's compressions and electricity. If you look at the research on all of them, epi. For how long we've been given epi. Guess what? Anything now, there's research out there now. Anything 3 milligrams max, you're starting to have not the same neurological outcomes. So they want less than 3 milligrams total during a resuscitation event. I mean, that's some of the cutting edge stuff out there today. So the drugs, lidocaine, amio, lidocaine. Oh, give it, don't give it. It might work at the AB, it might not. Blah blah blah. So the winner chicken dinner is compressions and electricity. So it's not that I don't go into the advanced stuff, but no one yet can really show me, and I don't want to say no one, that's silly. Like you said, Melanie, I'm not calling anybody out because there are a lot more than others. But in general, our brains go to the advanced measures. We get worried about whether we can know that rhythm and then what drug goes with it. And while we're doing all that flub, feet don't fail me now, algorithm don't fail me. People say, don't you have the algorithms on the cart? And I say, have you ever seen one whip out an algorithm in the middle of a code and try to follow that thing? Wait a minute, hold on, wait just a minute. Wait, I think we're here. No, I think maybe we're here. No.
Okay. So, all right. Can I give you an example? I was in the middle of a code in the OR, and actually, surprisingly enough, it was the most seamless, smooth, well-run code I have ever been in my entire career. And the attending anesthesiologist was in charge of everything, and he legit had his algorithm spiral book in his pocket, and he had pulled it out, and he was, okay, well, let's do this now. All right, let's do this. But I think the combination of his complete and utter calm. He was not yelling. He was not screaming. He was not anxious. He was cool, calm, and collected. And everybody just clicked along, and we did what we needed to do in a manner that was almost just beautiful. I'm like, oh my, it can really be this nice.
So who wouldn't love that? So, I dog on the algorithms only because, people are supposed to have them memorized beforehand.
I've never seen it used any other time. That was a one-time example.
Do use it, and clearly it would work if you use it, but that was a beautiful scenario. I feel like I could go home. Thank you. I wish that wouldn't that be fabulous if that just happened? And not because of,
but I can't read the algorithms half the time. I don't know what I'm doing.
My brain is so difficult, but ultimately that's a great patient outcome. But in between, how do we all in that room feel? That's kind of my big thing. How do we as nurses and other healthcare providers, when the duty does hit the fan and that chaos ensues? What I've been talking about a lot lately, you guys, is think about how many people you guys in the OR will use you. How many people are in that room, whether it be in the OR or in an inpatient environment when there's a code? Literally, like how many do you think?
Oh, well, they swarm. They swarm
the place. There's so many
of
people.
them are useless,
right?
To be
so
honest.
Conversely, who is the masters of all cardiac arrest? Okay, pre-hospitals or EMS. How many do you think are in the back of the ambulance running a code?
One, two.
One, maybe two.
Yeah, right.
Funsies, the whole 9 yards.
Yeah.
Smooth as silk. And they practice with their teams all the time, high performance resuscitation, which would be drills, pit crew style drills. So people often say, if you're just getting your foundational knowledge, basic, advanced, or pediatric life support, regardless of who it's from, to me, that equals compliance. That's our way to say we are compliant. We've been exposed to the basics. Then there's performance. Performance is, I think that might not be quite enough. We'd like to practice a little. So now I call that's a performance level unit or hospital or system. But until you decide to do it ongoing and then agree to evaluate what that looks like. So what are we measuring? We're going to do this ongoing, and then we're going to reevaluate. Well, now you're high performance, and that's what I'm after.
Okay, well, that actually leads me to another question, because I'm thinking about this whole evaluation and practicing and training. And I think about my experience in the operating room when we've had our annual education or something, on a code, and people just kind of blow it off, or they stand there and they kind of talk through it. Okay, well, if there was a code, you would go do this and you would go do that. But it's more of maybe objective or just talking through it. I don't think I've ever participated in an actual let's practice, simulate this, and do it for real as a team, other than when I'm back in the back closet of the hospital working on that dummy that I can't get to breathe properly, and I blow out their lungs every time I try.
I have a hack for that breathing situation. I have a hack.
So then, you'll have to tell us. But I also want to know, obviously that's a unique example just to the departments that I've been in and what I've seen. But what about overall, because you are training and because you are teaching other people, what are the issues of training that you're seeing as you're going out and about in teaching healthcare professionals about codes? What are maybe the barriers or the problems that you see when you talk to them?
So the barriers abound, but without giving a stack on top of a stack, ultimately it's culture. So it's a hospital culture. So a hospital a system that expects to save will. If you have this situation where we only do the foundational knowledge, we aren't in the performance or the high performance category. And frankly, guys, when people say they're in performance, that means they're usually hitting their required, like you just described. Okay, so we have to do this, whatever it may be, once a quarter. It's on one unit, not all units. And if you're not there that day, well, guess what? You don't get it. And then they kind of do that. This is not all, because some systems are really on this. Systems that have more resources, they have dedicated code teams, dedicated code data collectors, like a whole team that's collecting data. You can get data from the, actual code sheets. You can get it from the defibrillator. And then so there's immediate debrief and then giant feedback sessions. Okay, but that is just not the norm. Unfortunately, that's kind of the upper crusty, high performance situations. But other than that, barriers tend to be primarily cultural. Secondarily, does the system have rapid response teams dedicated, or do they just piecemeal it? So that kind of sets up the tone. Then those rapid response teams, when they show up, do they show up with joy in their hearts and sunshine beaming from them saying, I'm here to help you. What is your question? That's okay. Oh, just scooch over. Well, let us show you. Or they'd be like, oh my God, get out of the way. What's going on here?
Right.
You know, you idiots. How do you not know how to do this?
You know,
they might not say that. They may not say that, but the vibe, right? You are responsible for the energy you bring into a space.
Sure.
Yeah.
And often then that sets up a barrier because then the nurse, gosh darn it, she's not going to call a rapid again. She's not going to call for help. He or she.
Am I going to have you judge
He
me?
might or she might not come back, right? God, I'm so dumb. I can't do this. I got to get out of the way. It's horrible, that emotional burden that we carry because it's low frequency, high risk. And if we don't listen, you guys, even when it was instructor led, if you were in that classroom, it was not your equipment, it was not your team. You were embarrassed to death. You were worrying about that test the whole stupid class. And then when it's your turn, you don't know anything, right? Fred at the head, it's your turn. They're like, okay, what's this rhythm? And you're like, oh. And on the side of the bed, you're like, oh, dummy, it's SVT. You know, like, so the whole setup of that learning situation, no matter, and I tried, I had, you guys, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands. I tweaked it. I loved on them. I did everything I could. It still didn't translate to practice. So barrier. Then there's barriers with, okay, let's go back to the training, right? So there's barriers with the equipment. Do they ever have, you guys, when did it become where only the charge nurse handled the crash cart? Once a shift, somebody touches that sucker, plugs, unplugs, does a little quick test, and then signs off.
Yeah, only the charge nurse touches it.
And then you're done, please.
And it was probably just because they didn't want to hear it from the uppers. They just wanted to be able to check the box and move on and make sure it was done so that they could then have a clear shift and get on.
We have to have it documented that it's been tested every single day. And since it has to be documented, it's easier, quote unquote, to make it the charge nurse's responsibility. And it's part of their morning checkoffs or shift checkoffs to just check it off and be done. But that means nobody else knows even knows how to turn on the defibrillator.
They don't know how to turn it on. So you got, just to add a few more barriers, if your systems, many systems report to American Heart Association's Get With The Guidelines. Okay, that's a data collection gig, like, wow, it's like 6 pages long. There's so many data points in there. To me, that's a barrier in participating, but, I digress. But there's a section in there that I pull out in my presentations. In fact, I'm going to be talking about it a little bit at NTI this year. But you should see the checks that they have for a post code, what items on this checklist were possibly barriers. Where they didn't know where it was located, the crash cart. They didn't know how to turn it on. They didn't know, and there's like 15 things, and this is on Get With The Guidelines. So the barriers abound. And in my opinion it comes down to meat and potatoes. Are you practicing with your team and your equipment in your space ongoing? That's it. So if you're not, and you've never turned that thing on, or you've never even taken the backboard off, ever, do you want to know what the evidence? I'm going to get crazy. You guys get me on my soapbox. But the backboard alone, I'm working on a magnet project with Code Prep in a healthcare system right now. And we have to prove outcomes. I'm like, okay, that's easy. But they're really specific. It's like using a grant, right? You've got to match the needs of the questions for magnet. Well, one of them is an outcome. But I said, well, and this is specifically about Code Prep, pre and post. So I said, well, let's go all the way back to the beginning to what your codes look like before Code Prep and after. Let's go to the very beginning. What's the one thing? How about let's go to are compressions happening? Yes. Are they now placing the pads correctly? Yes. Are they using the backboard every single time? After Code Prep. But they said before Code Prep, never. The backboard was not even in existence. Well, how much research can I even pull that talks about being on a hard surface? Again, you guys in the OR, you're already on that board, but not on a squishy bed, right? Squishy bed, squishy head. So these are the basics. We're going to put them on a backboard so that their compressions improve so we get goodie in and garbage out of the brain. And then, can we push the button? This is the defibrillator. The magic, there's 3 steps to using a defibrillator, guys, and it's right on the face of the defibrillator. Step 1, turn it on. Step 2, push the analyze button. No heroes, no egos. Push the damn button. The machine knows the rhythm, whether it's shockable or not. And then if it glows red, what do you do?
Push the button. Push the button.
Okay, so case over. You just had your basic and advanced class.
So Susan, I have a question though, because I'm an educator and we teach repetition, right? That you're talking about. And the reason we do that is because muscle memory, because even when your brain is failing you because you're scared, or because you're intimidated or whatever, your body knows what to do. But in a lot of these hospitals, and especially in the operating room where we have control of your vital signs, we have control of your brain, right? We don't typically have codes very often. So, how do you control the internal responses and the feelings and the emotional things that, these healthcare providers are going through when they don't have that muscle memory to be able to take over, to be able to perform what they have to do in that code correctly? Do you have to be able to respond to those internal feelings that these healthcare providers are going through, because they aren't running codes every day. They're not all, not everyone works in a level 1 cardiac center.
Yeah. So you're talking about, fight, flight, or freeze. It's one of my biggest presentations. I talk about this a lot. And the answer to your question, Chris, is you're not going to control them unless you do brief hands-on repetitive practice. You're not going to control them. It's impossible. If you work ED or ICU or trauma, every time there's a code, we physiologically respond the same, right? Someone's still trying to die on you. You still have to, again, feet, hands, and brain, don't fail me now. Every situation, even though the responses are identical, it's like every situation is always like, I call it like a pot of chili, right? You never make chili the same way. I don't know, how can a code be so different every single time when you're doing the exact same things? It's like the same recipe, but you end up missing something based on the positioning in the room, the people that are there, right? Because you'll know, like even ED, ICU, I call them the crackheads. The same crackheads go to every code every single time because they love that stuff. But everybody else is like, yeah, peace out, I'm good. I'll watch the rest of the unit. But if, let's say, the crackheads aren't there that day, so there's another, shift in dynamics. So there isn't a way to control your fight, flight, or freeze other than brief, hands-on, repetitive practice. In my knowledge, because it's going to happen to you anyway. So let's channel it. You channel that epi rush you're getting. Your eyes dilate, your back, you get constriction, so that you can respond. But if you don't learn to channel it and to your question, Melanie, just a bit ago, we're not sitting there reading what we're going to do. Like, they're doing it. And by the way, it's hysterical. You really laugh because it's so bad. When you start, it's so bad. And you've got like the haters over there charting, and they're watching out of the side of their eye. They're like, I am not doing this. I am way too busy. And they're watching. And then we all start cutting up and laughing, right? Because the pads are like stuck on the ear and like on the butt. And you're like, okay, that's okay. We're just going to try this again.
So then you have to change the minds of the administration that is creating the policy to say that it is policy that we have to practice often. And you have to make the hospital staff, like, you have to say, we're going to practice all the time, every single,
So how do you change that?
That's what
because right now it's BLS or ACLS every 2 years. And then maybe we will talk about a code, or maybe our annual competencies has something about a code in it or what we're supposed to do. But how do you change the culture so that we are actually hands-on, practiced, prepared, and that we recognize that a code is one of those disasters that we will face in our departments that is expected. This is not a surprise. We are operating on people and cutting them open. The chances that they are going to crash are there. So since we know that, how do we change the culture to incorporate that preparedness so that we can be ready?
See, this is it. This is exactly where I am in my personal, in my professional, and in my business life. What's happening is just that. Listen, healthcare systems are not getting smaller. Our acuity is not going down. Codes are more and more frequent. We're not going to get into all the reasons why, but it's okay. Again, codes are not we're never in vogue, but let's face it, they're never going out of style. So I've had a lot of conversations lately with larger healthcare systems, 36,000 nurses underneath them, 54 campuses or something. And so the cost of those compliance courses is going up, 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 while the outcomes are not changing. And we don't have exactly what you just described. So in my opinion, this is a glass ceiling moment, a disruptor like Maximoso. And that is I didn't know that was my goal. I can tell you right now, in my heart and mind and soul, when I created Code Prep, it was to be in addition to, cherry on top of, our current training. But I am now feeling like it will be replacing. They keep asking me, what does this replace? I'm like, well, it doesn't replace anything because nobody does it. And they're like, well, what do you mean? I'm like, well, they're not doing it.
Mic drop.
Boom.
So I'm like, you know what though? I can tell you what it needs to replace. It needs to replace what we're doing. We don't need to spend 6 hours on a computer at home learning the foundations of and the vessels that are what? No. We need clinical verification of skills. And it's not just my, soapbox skill that we need clinical verification. When we have orientation and we have competencies every year, or, whether it be brand new orientation or a unit orientation in healthcare, and then we have competencies, we need clinical competency, not running them through like cattle and crossing off. And, I don't care how you do it. You do it in person, you do it online. I don't care how you do it. If we can't prove that you can do it clinically, not only are we setting up for failure at the outcomes space, which, gosh, this is what we do it for, but we're also setting up failure for how are our nurses feeling about our skills. You guys know exactly how it feels to be in a situation where you don't feel prepared and you're too nervous because you should by now. Like, okay, you've been a nurse for this long, you've been in this unit so long, you've never had that appropriate training, but you're a senior person, even by a year or 2 months, you're more than the one, but you don't know what to do because you have not been supported in this. So in my opinion, how we change a culture is you change you pivot when the pivot is, I'm seeing a pivot right here and right now. And I have other people in resuscitation that are talking to me about this. Where's the clinical verification? I have an app coming.
Yay.
And I'm adding an additional module to my program right now, which is a clinical skill verification on basic, advanced, and pediatric skills. You can get it on your phone or through your iWatch or whatever. I can't see I'm wearing watches, but I have to wear one now because of this. And you're gonna say whatever her name is in there, Siri or whatever her name is, Siri, CPR. Yeah. And it pops on. Listen, I'm not a software developer. I just yell at
it. And that's cool.
Yes.
This is what I need. So it's going to be, it'll be like community code prep. So they'll immediately be able to get, and this can be used in training and or in a real code. So you're going to get your rate and your depth and time to first shock, because that's my big deal. Rate and depth and time to first shock. And then it will go on from there. You can do the drugs and stuff like that in this app. The point is clinical verification. So to your question is, I say out with the old and in with the new. I am not against the foundational knowledge that all of our resuscitation greats have created, but even JACO, ILCOR, they came out with these resuscitation standards for hospitals. But guess what? They're recommendations. And then there's fine print that says, now you guys go home and figure it out yourself.
Thank you.
All right. So we are too rapidly coming to the end of this conversation, and I'm having way too much fun. But I want to kind of tie a bow a little bit on everything that we've talked about and throw it back at you for some final thoughts and advice. But what I have heard through this conversation is that, yes, the very important time for response to a cardiac arrest is that first 2 to 6 minutes. But the people who respond immediately, that are right there at the beginning in that first minute or so, they still have to start. They've still got to be ready. They've got to go into gear so that when our code team or rapid response team arrives 3, 4, 5 minutes later, we haven't lost the first 2 to 4 minutes because we can do it and we can start. But the only way for us to get there is that hands-on, clinically verified training that we really know what we're doing, and we have to do it often and consistently and regularly, actually putting our hands on a dummy of some sort to practice this so that when it really happens, we're ready. And I think another key part of that is also avoiding some of that moral injury that comes to our nurses, because we get put in a situation, we're not prepared, we're not ready, we don't know, and then we carry that guilt and injury later after a traumatic event because we don't feel like we were prepared. So those are the key things I think that I heard through this conversation of ways that we can make it better and ways that we can work to change our culture to improve not only outcomes for our patients, but also the something for our employees.
Well, I always use the word self-efficacy. I like building self-efficacy. And courage is, the easier way to say that. But if we are not courageous in these skills, then that just like what you just described, shouldn't I? Oh my gosh, I did not. And regardless of the outcome, you go home feeling like, oh my, you shouldn't have to say prayers on your way into work every day that, please Lord, not me, not today, have a code. And they do. A lot of us do. So.
Yeah. Well, is there anything else before we close this conversation that you want to leave our audience with before we end this episode for today?
Well, I feel a little remiss that we didn't get enough into disaster because
I know.
we described my soapbox as a disaster, and
Yeah.
I don't know. I think specifically because a lot of your listeners are from the OR space, and I want them to know that, for instance, right now I'm working as an expert witness on an OR case. Yeah, an OR-OB case gone wrong. And, I keep saying, mic drop, case closed. I don't know why you guys keep studying this, and the BLS wasn't done. It was, but there was delays because of that whole situation we've talked. We're not going to get into that can of worms now. But I just want you guys to know that, yes, talk about low frequency, high risk, at OR, and then add an OB, as a C-section. And then there's all that hierarchy, and talk about a culture. Holy smoke. So what, and you gave an example of this amazing anesthesiologist who was like, rock star, read very quietly, or do this, and this. Well, this didn't happen in this case. Anesthesiologist blew it in a couple different ways. And then everyone else is like, again, shouldn't I? So what about OR culture? What about the cath lab? What about ED and ICU? I mean, there's cultures in pre-op, post-op. Codes happen in all these places, radiology, these weird spots where we have weird things. So I guess what I want to say is I totally appreciate the dynamics of an OR code and how tricky that is. But talk about a culture that's going to be harder to break into than all the others. I'm going to pick you, Melanie. I'm going to pick you guys. OR, because of the setup and calling overhead, or not calling overhead. When should we call overhead? I get it, nights, weekends, and all this stuff. Do we reach over the drape? Do we not? Oh my gosh. I mean, so I'd like to say that code prep doesn't care where you are, who you are, what your job is. The first 2 to 6 minutes looks the same. There should not be a pause because somebody in the room, 6 somebodies, 8 somebodies in an OR room, and no one's doing compressions. Because Fred at the head saying, no, I've got, I'm looking at the capnography or whatever. Anyway, so hands down, you don't even have to have any equipment, right? So if you only have your hands, it doesn't matter. Recognize the problem, call for help, and acting is the same in your living room. I know it seems far-fetched to say that it's the same as your living room as it is in the OR with all that going on, but ultimately, if we get that mindset, it's the same.
Wow. All right. Well, Susan, yeah, we can act quickly and we can save a life. And that is huge. Thank you so much for spending some time with us today. To everyone listening, if you want to get more information from Susan, or if you want to follow her on LinkedIn, certainly reach out to her on LinkedIn, but also you can find her at rescuern.com, and you can get more information about code prep and just about readiness in codes. And hopefully we can change our culture and work and be prepared so that the codes that we do have don't turn into disasters in our departments. Thank you, Susan.
Thank you guys so very much for having me.
That was Susan Davis, Resuscitation Manager at a healthcare system in Florida. And Chris, I don't know about you, but I know that I get incredibly nervous every time we have a code. I will absolutely go running in to help every time I'm free, but I'm also secretly hoping that I can run in and offer to help, but they don't need me, or I can just be the recorder in the back corner, because it's just a terrifying experience. And I always hope that someone smarter than me is in charge, somebody else who I feel like really knows what they're doing. But I think that too many of us are simply afraid of making a mistake. And we know that a patient's life is on the line, and that's a really big responsibility. However, Susan made it very clear that we can be ready, we can be prepared, and we can know what to do and immediately step into action. I think she really laid that out for us today and highlighted just how important it is that we train regularly and prepare so that we are always ready.
I completely agree. And it's not just being ready for a code inside the operating room. Heart attacks, these things happen outside of the operating room and in our daily life. And we want to be able to help regardless of where we are. And as we'll talk about this season, disasters of all shapes and sizes happen everywhere. And we want to be able to help no matter where we are, what's going on. And the things Susan shared with us today are good reminders for everybody, regardless of whether you're a healthcare provider or not.
Yeah, absolutely. And the key to action is being prepared so that when disaster strikes, you just have that muscle memory. It kicks in and you go, and you don't get frozen by that indecisiveness of, what do I do? What do I not do? Who am I supposed to call? And so I think it's very important that we remember how important it is that we actually train and actually practice. But that is going to do it for this week's episode. But stay tuned. We are only halfway through the season, and we still have so much more to come. On behalf of Chris, myself, and the whole team here at First Case, thanks for listening to this week's podcast.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of First Case. As a reminder, you can help support us by subscribing to First Case on your favorite podcast app or by downloading the smartphone app on iPhone or Android. Simply search for First Case in the App Store or Google Play. The best thing about downloading the smartphone app is that you can access bonus content for certain episodes and view episodes in certain categories, like articles on the go and vendor spotlights. Are you following us on LinkedIn or Facebook yet? If you are and you love an episode or post, then let your social network know about it. Like, comment, or share our posts along with your thoughts and keep the conversation going. If you have any topics or guests that you would like to recommend for a future episode, just send us an email to info@firstcasemedia.com. We look forward to hearing from you.